Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We're coming to the end, of course, Lashana Tovah. So we're going to do some double, triple duty for this particular 10-minute Torah. We have Shabbat coming up, and by the time you all see this, and I'm going to try and get this out a little early, because we've got Rosh Hashannah, and since there are 2 days of Rosh Hashannah, there are 2 Torah portions, and there's a lot of different commentary. So it's interesting. It's an interesting contrast, because in our progression through the Torah, in our schedule of portions, we're almost at the end of Deuteronomy. The 2 portions that are read on Rosh Hashanah are actually from Genesis, and they both involve Abraham. So let's start with portion Vayelech, which is the second or third to last in the Torah. And again, it is Moses' last day. He has been addressing the Israelites. He is now basically passing the mantle, giving command to Joshua, to Hoshua ben Nun, who will be bringing the Israelites into the land to conquer it and settle it. Interestingly enough, the next book in the series, the next portion after the Torah, would be the prophets, and the first book of the prophets is, of course, Joshua. It's basically continuing the story of Judaism. So Joshua's going to take the people, the Israelites, into the land. Moses is basically telling everybody, giving them a little goodbye speech. And what this particular portion focuses on is the fact that everybody is going to have to study Torah, but not just study Torah, all right? It starts off talking about how kings, when they ascend the throne, have an obligation to write not 1, but 2 Torahs. Now, I believe the Talmud says that if there's already a Torah in place, if, say, this is the son of a king who's taking over for his father, and he already has a Torah, then he only has to write 1. But why 2 Torahs? 1 for himself, 1 for the temple library. And why do we have to write the Torah? Why write out the whole thing? Well, years ago when I was in school, one of our teachers said you learn through your fingers. So what are you doing? You're sitting in class, you're taking notes, and as you take notes, as you write out the words, you're incorporating them into your brain, into your mind. And that's how we learn. We learn through our fingers, we learn through writing. It is also really hones in, really focuses in, really just kind of embeds the fact that the king is not above the people when it comes to the commandments. The king must obey the commandments the same way all the other people have to obey the commandments. The king is not only is the king not above the law, but the king has to set an example by following the law, following the commandments. All right? The king has to observe Shabbat. He has to be honest in his dealings with people. He has to love his neighbor as himself, etc., etc. So hence the idea of the Torah, of copying the Torah. Now it's kind of ingrained, okay? The other portions that we will address this week are the portions from Rosh Hashanah. Now, the first portion that's read on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, it talks about how there's Abraham and Sarah, and Abraham is rewarded with a son through his wife Sarah. Now, in the commentary, in the Art Scroll, the Orthodox commentary, it talks about how Abraham had been with the Egyptians, and some of the women had been barren, and he prayed for them to have sons and daughters, and they did. And when you pray for someone for something, you're rewarded with it as well. So since Abraham was so gracious, and he was so humble in asking for these other people to have offspring, he was rewarded finally at the ripe old age of 90, of 100. He was going to have a son too, and that would be Isaac. As Isaac was weaned and was a little boy, remember, he also had his son Ishmael through the Egyptian maidservant, some people think princess, Hagar. And Ishmael was, coming from pagan stock, hadn't really been inculcated in Torah. So he was not exactly, shall we say, as gracious maybe as he should have been. So he would kind of play with Isaac. Now, when the Torah says that he played with Isaac, what they really mean is that he would tease them. Some people think in the Midrash he was a very accomplished bowman. He would actually shoot arrows in the direction of Yitzchak. And Sarah saw this and, of course, was just beside herself. So she basically banished Hagar and Ishmael out of the family. And even though Abraham was very depressed, because after all, Ishmael was still his son, he was really kind of his firstborn, he went along with it. Hashem said, no, this is the right thing. They really shouldn't be around you people because of who they are, and they're not really inculcating the same values that you and Sarah have, that you're going to pass along to a whole new people, the Israelites, the Hebrews. So it was okay that he sent them packing. And of course, Hagar goes off and, as if to demonstrate that they really didn't have the same sense of values that Abraham and Sarah did. She ran out of water, the water that he gave her, and she was sitting by a tree. And, she took Ishmael, who was about 13, 14, 15 years old, put him on the side because she didn't want to see him thirst to death. And an angel came down and said, don't worry, there's a spring over there, and, Ishmael will be the father of the people too. But the fact that, here's a mother that's, putting her son out of sight so you didn't see him die, I mean, that's crazy, right? The first, if you were, for all of us, men, women, your kids are having problems with thirst, they want to drink, what do? You do what you have to do to get them water, right? She just like, I don't want to see it, it's too much for me. So it really kind of showed her true colors. And therefore, their action was really kind of justified in sending him away. They didn't want him influenced, and certainly didn't want Ishmael to accidentally hurt Isaac either. So there it was. The final portion that we read for Rosh Hashanah, the one on Rosh Hashanah 2, is the idea of the Akedah, which was the altar that Abraham was told to sacrifice Isaac. Now, by the way, Isaac was supposedly born on Rosh Hashanah, and that's part of the whole idea. That's part of the connection. That's Midrash too, or folklore. So what was the Akedah? All right. So Hashem comes down to Abraham and says, I want you to sacrifice your son. And Abraham, without flinching, went and did it. He went ahead and he took Isaac. Now, in this particular portion, Abraham was an old man. Isaac was about 35 years old. Yet he was still dutiful. He still followed his father. And they went on a journey for 3 days. And part of the idea of that, was the fact that Abraham could have had a lot of time to turn around and say, you know what, Hashem, as much as I love you and I want to do your bidding, this is a little too much for me. He didn't do that. He followed him blindly. And he went up to the Akedah, the altar, and he tied up Isaac on the altar. And remember, Isaac was 35. Abraham was over 100. He could have overpowered him and not done this at any time, but Isaac went willingly. He did. He was going to comply with the idea of being sacrificed. And of course, at the end, we saw that, as Abraham was about to, let loose with the knife or the hatchet, whatever he had, an angel stopped his hand and said, no, there's a ram over there, and go get the ram, and that's what you're going to sacrifice. And as some of you may know, one of the reasons we use the shofar to bring in the new year is in honor of the ram that was sacrificed, the ram's horn. So we blow the shofar. And in fact, Rosh Hashanah, the idea, it's not mentioned as Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. It is referred to as the first day of the 7th month, is a Yom Teruah, day of blowing the shofar. Now, just kind of as an aside, since we're in that mode anyway, Tishrei, the first of Tishrei, which is when we actually change the year, it is now 5779, is actually the spiritual new year. It's the 7th month. Judaism is very big on the number 7. It's the number of completion. Sheva, shave, which means sit, Shabbat. It all comes from kind of like the same root. So the 7th day is Shabbat. The 7th week, we got 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot, and that's a very holy time. It commemorates when Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the 10 Commandments. The 7th month is the New Year. It's the spiritual New Year. Now, the first month of the secular year is actually Nisan, and that is when Moshe Rabbeinu led the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, the land of bondage, into freedom. 15 days later, on the new moon, on the full moon, we have Pesach. So that's the secular New Year. This Tishrei is now the spiritual New Year. So as we approach the New Year, as we all think about, our New Year's resolutions, let us think about being better people to ourselves, better people to our loved ones, better people to everyone. Let's really take stock of who we are. And that's a tough thing to do. It's not easy. It's not easy to put yourself under the spotlight and say, wow, there are times when I could have done better. Well, let's make it this time when we can do better. Look deep into yourself. Right? Maybe like Sarah, we want to cast off those things that don't work, that hurt us. There's kind of a metaphor there, and hint, hint, that'll be the Rosh Hashanah sermon. So I wish you all the Shana Tova. We had apples and honey, the sweetness for the sweet New Year. Looking forward to seeing you all in services. And if we don't see you in services, hopefully you're doing something else. You're visiting one of the other congregations in the area, or you're doing something meaningful yourself. L'Shana Tova, a Happy New Year, and once again, thank you for listening to my 10-Minute Torahs.